Matt Stone sat alone at the worn wooden table in the Ravenwood Precinct's interrogation room, the air thick with the musty scent of old paper and stale coffee. No lawyer flanked him. No gleaming badge adorned his chest. Just an old leather jacket frayed at the sleeves, its zipper catching on a tear, and a battered file folder clutched between his calloused hands. His gray hair was unkempt, streaked with silver from years under the sun, and his face bore the deep lines of 30 years on the force, etched by sleepless nights and close calls. He hadn't spoken since the hearing began, his silence a stark contrast to the murmurs rippling through the room. Across from him, Captain Daniel Hargrove, a man in his early 40s with a chiseled jaw and a reputation for ruthless ambition, smirked between sharp-tongued remarks. His tailored uniform gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a stark contrast to Matt's weathered appearance. Hargrove cast sidelong glances, as if watching a relic crumble under the weight of time. The room was stifling, the faulty air conditioner wheezing like an old dog, its hum blending with the occasional creak of the building's aging frame. A few officers in the back, young recruits with freshly pressed uniforms, snickered when Matt stumbled over a legal term, his voice rough and unused. Hargrove seized the moment, leaning forward with a smug grin. "He's a washed-up has-been wasting our time," he declared, his voice cutting through the tension. "Unfit to represent himself, let alone handle a case." His attorney, Claire Redmond, a sharp-suited woman with a reputation for dismantling witnesses, nodded in agreement, her pen tapping an impatient rhythm. Matt didn't flinch. He kept his hands folded over the folder, his hazel eyes fixed ahead, unreadable. The hearing centered on a cold case Matt had reopened, a series of disappearances tied to Victor Crane, a slick developer who'd risen from obscurity to own half of Ravenwood's real estate. Matt had spent months gathering evidence in secret, piecing together faded photographs, witness statements, and a cryptic letter delivered to his doorstep. The precinct, now under Hargrove's iron grip, had shut him down, labeling him delusional and threatening arrest for interference. The file in his hands held the key, years of notes, a map of Crane's properties, and that letter, its ink smudged but its warning clear. Crane's men are closing in. The precinct holds the truth. The sender was unknown, but Matt suspected it was someone from his past, a ghost he couldn't yet name. The letter had arrived 2 weeks earlier, slipped under the door of his cramped apartment above a shuttered diner. Matt lived alone, the silence broken only by the drip of a leaky faucet and the occasional groan of the building's sagging floors. His wife, Ellen, had passed 5 years ago, and his colleagues had drifted after his forced retirement following a botched raid that cost 2 young officers their lives. The guilt still haunted him, a shadow he carried like the limp from a bullet lodged too deep to remove. Rent hikes had strained his pension, and the neighborhood had transformed. New faces, new rules, and a creeping unease he couldn't shake. He hadn't called for help. There was no one left to trust, no ally in a department he no longer recognized. That morning, Matt arrived at 8:45, his hands steady despite the ache in his joints. The precinct buzzed with officers prepping for routine patrols, their radios crackling with static. His presence drew curious stares, whispers trailing him like smoke. Hargrove, a man who'd climbed ranks on charm and calculated moves, barely acknowledged him, assuming this would be a quick dismissal. The hearing began with Redmond presenting a case to discredit Matt. He's incoherent, unprepared, and clinging to outdated vendettas, she argued, her voice slicing through the room. Matt remained still, the folder a silent anchor, its edges worn from years of handling. When Magistrate Layla Khan, a stern woman with piercing eyes, asked if Matt had evidence, he slid the letter across the table. Khan read it, her expression shifting from boredom to intrigue. The letter detailed Crane's ties to the disappearances, corroborated by retired Chief Inspector Elena Vasquez, a legend from Matt's early days who'd worked undercover against Crane's early operations. Con's pen paused mid-scribble. She looked up, not at Matt, but at Hargrove, who was tapping his pen impatiently. "This isn't irrelevant," she said, her voice firm. Redmond protested. "His past service doesn't excuse his interference," but Con cut her off. "It gives context to a man who's been silenced." Matt reached into the folder again, unwrapping a cloth to reveal his tarnished badge, its edges worn but gleaming faintly under the lights. He placed it on the table, letting it rest in plain view. The room stilled. Officers who'd laughed earlier leaned forward, drawn by an unspoken weight. Con asked, "Mr. Stone, why bring this?" Matt's voice was low, steady. "Because some truths don't fade, ma'am. And I needed you to see who's been buried under the lies." He didn't raise his voice or point fingers. He simply let the badge speak. Hargrove's jaw tightened, his confidence wavering. Redmond faltered, her argument crumbling. Without a word, she gathered her papers and left, the door clicking shut behind her. A murmur rose, then soft applause, hesitant, respectful, like a recognition long overdue. Matt didn't react. He rewrapped the badge, tucked it away, and limped toward the exit. Officers stepped aside, their eyes following him with newfound respect. Con didn't issue a ruling. The truth had already shifted the room's balance. Outside, Matt sat on a bench, the folder on his lap, the city's hum fading into the background. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. A young officer, Lena Ortiz, approached hesitantly. She was a rookie with wide eyes and a nervous smile, one of the few who'd listened to Matt's warnings. "Sir, I found something in the archives that backs your case," she said, handing him a USB drive. It contained surveillance footage from Crane's latest property, showing men loading unmarked crates under cover of night. Matt nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. The fight wasn't over. Days later, Matt and Lena devised a plan. They'd use the evidence to lure Crane into a trap at an abandoned warehouse, a place Matt knew from his patrol days. The night was thick with fog, the warehouse's rusted doors creaking in the wind. Crane arrived with two henchmen, their silhouettes menacing under the dim streetlights. Matt, hidden behind crates, signaled Lena to cut the power. Darkness fell, and the fight began. Gunshots echoed, crates splintered, and Matt's old training kicked in. He disarmed one henchman with a swift move, while Lena tackled the other. Crane fled, but Matt pursued, his limp slowing him only slightly. In a final confrontation, Matt cornered Crane, the developer's smugness fading as Matt held the USB drive aloft. "This ends tonight," Matt growled. Backup arrived, uncorrupted officers from a neighboring county, tipped off by Lena. Crane was arrested, the evidence secured. Back at the precinct, Hargrove's corruption unraveled, his resignation swift and silent. Matt returned to his apartment, the badge back on its shelf, but the weight of solitude lifted. Lena visited, promising to keep fighting. As he watched the sunrise, Matt knew the mystery of the letter's sender remained, perhaps Vasquez, watching from the shadows. The precinct buzzed with whispers of change, proof that some battles are won with quiet strength, a tarnished badge, and an unyielding will.